What is up, guys? Martini's Cantina here, back with another video, Tales of the Galaxy 2, along with the famous comic book writer, Rodney Barnes. How you doing today, Rodney?
Hanging in there. Thank you. How are you?
Good. I appreciate you coming on for the show. I know that we're different time zones, so we had to work out a few things, but I appreciate you making time.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Would you mind just telling the viewers just a little bit of your backstory of how you became a writer? I know you used to do like producing and stuff. How does that kind of transition to your writing career?
I still do produce. I started when I was in Maryland. I was a production assistant on movies and TV shows in DC, Maryland, Virginia area. Did a bunch of big movies as a PA, and then eventually did a movie, Major Pain, and struck up a friendship with the actor comedian Damon Wayans. He sort of, nudged me in the right direction, sent me out to California, and I kind of figured my way around, lived in my car, that classic LA story, and then
Hmm.
ultimately got my first job on his show, My Wife and Kids, and for the most part, been working ever since.
I saw that you were one of the producers on Everybody Hates Chris.
Yes,
How does something like right now, I feel like you're more traditionally like a horror writer. How do
yeah.
you transition from like kind of like a comedy, kind of like a dark humor kind of thing, just because everyone does hate Chris,
hmm
to where you are now?
Um, I look at it all as story. I
Hmm.
mean, I never saw myself as a comedy writer per se. I know a lot of really funny people. I think I have a decent sense of humor, but that was never really, in my opinion, that was never really the passion per se.
Hmm.
The passion was always horror, genre, drama, those types of things. But I went through the door that opened first, and I knew there was a lot that I didn't know, still a lot that I don't know. But it was opportunities like that that sort of helped me get my footing under me and get me to a place where I'm doing the stuff I'm doing now.
What was one of your favorite films that you worked on, just in
Uh,
terms of like popularity or just your personal interests?
the Green Mile, Stephen King's The Green Mile. I was
Hmm.
Michael Clark Duncan stand-in on that movie, and I really just wanted to meet Stephen King, which I did.
Yeah, that's a
And
lot of people's goals.
yeah, it was, at the time I loved his work so much, and I felt like as a guy who was basically living out of his car, that if I could get close to touch and just feel like he was real, that somehow it would keep me going. And it did.
Would you say that he kind of sparked your horror interests? Or
No.
no?
Even as a kid, I would love the Hammer films and the Universal Monsters and comic books, House of Mystery, EC Comics, a lot of that stuff when I was a kid. So it was already there. He just sort of solidified it.
Gotcha. So in terms of comic books, you're on a lot of different runs. Obviously, your most famous, in my opinion, would be Killadelphia.
hmm
Um, for just to jump back in, I'm mainly a Star Wars channel. So for like the Star Wars portion, you did Lando, Inquisitors, Mandalorian, Ahsoka. How do you jump into Star Wars? Were you always a Star Wars fan, or is it something that kind of just fell into your lap a little bit?
Always a Star Wars fan. I know bigger fans, I know
Hmm.
smaller fans.
Yeah,
I had all the sideshow AT-ATs and Tauntauns and all the characters from the first three films and
yeah.
all over my house. So I was a fan. I don't think when I'm working with the Lucasfilm Marvel folks on a Star Wars property, they're like the degree of what a character's uniform, like the insignia on a uniform, and what ship was where when, and this is a Clone Wars era,
Hmm.
this I don't know that.
I gotcha.
So oftentimes when I'm writing a script or I'm doing a project, thank God they're in place to be able to fact check and to be at a place. I've never been that much of a fan of anything,
Hmm.
to the place where I understand to that degree, but I admire it and I've always been a fan.
So, like Mandalorian and Ahsoka was more based off of the films, with your Ahsoka 5 coming out, what was that, yesterday? But something
Yeah.
like Lando, that was more of like there's not really like a storyline per se for Lando in the films, besides, like a little bit, in like the original trilogy, obviously. For something like Lando, is it a little bit more fact checking and stuff, just in terms of the storyline really isn't as prominent as, like a Ahsoka series, like everything's there in black and white.
When I got that gig, basically it was the Solo movie. I
Okay.
was doing the Donald Glover version of Lando, young Lando.
Yeah.
And so my job was to say, what was he doing right before that movie started? And
Gotcha.
so I had that movie sort of as a barometer of the saying, okay, what his interests were, or what he was trying to accomplish. And it was more or less saying, okay, if I could meet young Lando 2 weeks before the Solo film, what was he doing 2 weeks before then? And create a story around that idea. What were his adventures? So that was sort of the idea with Solo, with
Gotcha.
Lando.
Yeah. Did you feel like you had to use like that fact checking a lot? Because I feel like for that kind of film, it was more set on just like one planet. It was a little bit more of quote unquote like a simpler film. Like, did you feel like you were referring back to like what planet is this? What type of ship does he have? Or were you pretty set in stone of where you needed to be there?
I knew the area. I knew I had the general area of what needed to be done and where he needed to be. The cool thing about stuff like that, and even in my Inquisitors mini, was I get to make up stuff. I get to
Hmm.
make up bad guys. I get to make up planets. I get to make up ships. Um, and the idea of the Inquisitors, I made up Jedi.
Hmm.
Three of them, and
Yeah.
so anytime you get an opportunity to sort of add to canon, that's always fun. So sometimes I don't want too much help, is the point.
I gotcha. For something like Philadelphia, you were an Eisner nominee. What
Yep.
was like kind of like that process? Just to do they kind of just give you like an email and you're like, hey, by the
Yeah,
way,
they send you an email and they say, hey, I've gotten two of those emails so far. Hey, you're an Eisner nominee and congratulations. Don't tell anybody.
Mhm.
2 weeks from now, we'll be making an announcement. We want to give you a heads up that the awards are going to be here. And if you'd like to attend, blah, 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 blah. But no, it's an exciting thing. I mean, the Eisners are kind of, I guess, seen as the Oscars or the Emmys of the comic book industry, and to be a two-time nominee with a relatively, I've been doing comics less than 10 years,
Mhm.
so to be at that place relatively early in is an honor, and I think it's opened some doors for me probably.
Were they both referring to Philadelphia or
Yes,
they
both
were
were
both?
Killadelphia. Yeah, and well, Blackula. I mean, I produced Blackula. Jason got nominated for the art.
Hmm.
The book didn't get nominated, but he wouldn't have known what to draw if I didn't write that script. So I'm gonna add myself. I'm gonna say I'm a
A
Eisner
three time.
nominee by Jason, just adjacent to Jason's work. So I'm
That's
gonna go.
fine.
I'm gonna steal some of his shine a little bit.
I mean, without him, there wasn't you, and without you, there wasn't him.
There
So
you go.
it
See,
works back together. I get it.
there you go. That what you just said. That thing there.
So with Killadelphia, I'm from Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a fun book to read. I love that. I love that series. It's so like just unique. How do
Mm-hmm.
you even come up with well, if you haven't read it yet, there's not then you're probably too late anyway. But for someone like John Adams and like just all that stuff, how do you come up with that? Is that just like a thought in your head or I mean the
Yeah.
story's just so unique. And
Thank
it's
you.
not like anything we've really read before.
Yeah. Thank you for the compliment. I think the thing for me is more of a lot of times when you're dealing in the world of vampires or classic monsters, a lot has already been done.
Mhm.
With vampires, you got karate vampires, you got your sexy vampires, you've got monstrous vampires, like, thoughtful vampires. But how can you add something to it that doesn't feel like it's either, oh, that's Anne Rice's, or oh, this is
Mhm.
Underworld, or, Near Dark, or whatever. And for me, I wanted to create a sense of mystery with the cop portion of it, like an investigation.
Yeah.
Felt like Philly being, I used to go on field trips when I was a Boy Scout way back when, to Philadelphia, to Liberty Bell, and, all the historical stuff that's around the city. And I was like, there's, in that is the idea of America. And
Mhm.
then there's also this other part, the challenging part that you see on Kensington and, throughout when you deal with poverty and, just despair. So I felt like it was a great setting. I thought the name Killadelphia was cool for Philadelphia.
I like it.
And, I know Meek Mill has said it a couple of times. And, but I just felt like within within that was a really cool idea. And if you could make a big villain who wasn't really a villain, I think your best villain's kind of like Vader. they
Hmm.
believe in what they're doing. You know, Vader is a Sith, and the Sith see existence different than the Jedi do.
Yeah.
So he doesn't see himself as a in quotes antagonist. He sees himself as this is the way. Thanos, same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Thanos
Like
believes
a
that he,
acclaimed leader, different world, like there needs to be change kind of
yeah,
deal.
and I'm doing it because you may not have the stuff to do it, but it needs to be. That doesn't mean doesn't need to be done.
Mhm.
So, creating a John Adams who was a sympathetic, empathetic figure, someone who loves America and someone who wants to see it be a particular thing and doesn't feel like we've gone in the direction from the founding fathers to today in that direction. To me, that was powerful enough to be able to give him motivation to do the things that he's done as far as turning the city into vampires and a lot of other people and giving people who were powerless power.
Mhm.
Um, I just felt like there was something there, and the rest of it is just finding the personal story, which was basically me and my father, trying to figure out how we can get along, and just adding all the parts together and slowly but surely going on a journey and seeing what happens.
I got two questions to piggyback off of that. My first question would be relating back to your father. Was it like kind of like a personal, like you guys didn't like, was it more of a, you guys growing up weren't like that close, or you guys were like kind of differential in opinions, or is it just you were just thinking that there needs to be that kind of figure in the book itself?
No, my father and I were estranged when he passed, and I
Okay.
always felt like if he had more time, if both
Hmm.
of us had more time to kind of work out our differences, would we have been able to mend our differences?
Hmm.
And that sort of lent to what could make more time. And
Understood.
vampires are immortal. So
Yeah.
if he could come back in some way and we were connected in some way, then there's that idea of humans being the food of vampires, or at least the blood of humans. So there's an adversarial component when he does come back. Can we be close because there's this thing now? He's a different thing than he used to be, but there's
Yeah.
still the part of him that's the same. And that complication was kind of cool to me narratively to create some sense of a a complicated idea within a narrative.
That's crazy that like you even can come up with that because like once I when I'm reading it, like I've reread, especially like 1 through 6, like that kind of foundation of the book. I reread that a few times. And it's it's a simple story in a way that like when you read it a few times, you're like, okay, this makes sense, this makes sense. But when you first read it, you're like, oh, like what did I just read? Like it's just crazy that you can kind of come up with that kind of storyline and stick with that storyline throughout, and like that even comes to your mind. And then for my second question is why John Adams? I mean, like Washington's probably too cliche, or was it just someone that you were like, there hasn't been much on John Adams in a while.
John Adams philosophically didn't own slaves. He believed in women's rights.
Hmm.
His wife was really the brains of the operation, from what I've learned through books.
Yeah.
And so he had the Adams, not to go with the pop culture Adams family, but the Adams family had John Quincy Adams, and they were very, very steeped into political culture. And so, for the most part, he was a progressive. But when you think about history, American history, he isn't the first name that comes to your mind when you think about, the founding fathers. It's
Yeah.
not like John
Definitely
Adams
not.
pops out,
Yeah.
and so, in a way, being the second president of the United States, um, you never think of the guy as number two. You never think in the Olympics, you think of who won the race. Even you don't think of the guy that got the silver.
Mm-mm.
And there was a joke on SNL this past week where Hillary's running mate, no one remembered his name, and even when he came out and he told them his name, when he went back around like 2 minutes later, he came back out and still no one remembered his name from 2 minutes ago.
Now that you
Uh,
say that, I forget her running mate too.
exactly, it was Tim somebody, I forget his name, but
Yeah.
obviously for obvious reasons. So
Yeah.
John Adams, if you didn't die and you were able to move through time for a couple hundred years, and now you're looking at America and you're looking at where we are, and you're looking at your place in history, and you're seeing the same thing that you and I are seeing, that would mess with your ego. Even the best of people have an ego, certainly a president. And now I've got the opportunity to make America in the gaze and the idea of what we originally intended. Um, But really, in order to do that, you have to elevate the idea of people and their sensibilities. And in order to be able to do that, they need power and perspective. What can give you that? Vampirism. It's like when you're a
Yeah.
vampire, you're not thinking about survival in the same way. You're not thinking about getting money.
Hmm.
You're thinking about finding blood. So it takes off the table. I got to go get a job. I got to go do this. I got to find a person. I got to find a human. I got to bite them. I got to drink their blood. I got to move on. And so you get that. You also become a predator. And in that predatory state, your senses are heightened. You're not dulled anymore by drugs or apathy or any of that kind of stuff. Now you're heightened to where do I go to get what it is that I need? And I thought that if I could put that idea into the minds of the vampires that occupy Killadelphia, the Killadelphia world, that it would be interesting and it would be something that we hadn't seen in like Blade or the Hammer films or any of the other things that had come before. Excuse me, Killadelphia.
No worries. So you were crew on Blade, right?
I was my first job as a resident of Los Angeles. I was my first job as a production assistant. Yep.
So being a PA for Blade, is there any type of like were you like a Blade fan like kind of growing up, or was there any type of relation that kind of wanted you to pick the vampire role instead of, like a werewolf role, which you recently did, or like a, like a Sandman, whatever.
No.
Like, no, do you just wanted vampires?
You mean for Killadelphia or for working on Blade?
Uh, just because of like from Killadelphia, like was vampires just
No,
one that?
vampires was that when I was thinking about my father and you're thinking about immortality, you need something that can talk. If
Hmm.
I had a werewolf, wouldn't be able to build a relationship with a werewolf.
That's
I wouldn't
fair.
be able to build a relationship with a zombie or
Yeah.
go down the list of all the monsters. None of them are actually thoughtful
Hmm.
in the same way that a vampire would be.
I gotcha. I want to touch on your new book, Batman Full Moon, which
Mm-hmm.
was absolutely fantastic. I know we talked a
Thank
little bit about New York Comic Con and stuff when I was there. That's how we originally met.
you. Mm-hmm.
For Batman Full Moon, just kind of just going on, the next few questions will probably be geared towards that because that's the new fresh work. How did you pick Subic to do your drawing, or was that just
Yes.
kind of?
Well, they were high on him and they suggested him to me. And then they sent me some of his work and I loved it. And so I said, yeah, that would be great.
Do you guys? This is your first book together, though, right? Or
Mm-hmm. It's our first.
gotcha. And then for that aspect of drawing, do you write for? I know some people like they kind of do like the process backwards, but for something like Batman Full Moon, do you write it first and then he draws towards it, or do you write off of his panels and kind of you guys work
No,
together, or
no. I write a script and then I send him the script and then pages come back.
pages? Gotcha. For a book like that, how did that come to mind? I mean, I know that there's obviously DC horror, but this is, I feel like, a little bit more unique of a horror book per se for DC. Were you always a Batman fan, or?
Yes, I've loved Batman since I was a kid. Neil Adams Batman was my Batman. Um, and never thought in a million years that I would get an email asking would I be interested in writing Batman. And incredible honor. Happy to be. I did a panel when I was in San Diego with like some classic Batman writers, like
Hmm.
guys who have been around, and Jim Lee, and all of these people. I'm like, what am I doing here? Why they invite me? But just to be able to have my first, even though I did do a Batman story in Brave and Bold with Jason Shawn Alexander, that was a short story. But here, having my own limited series with Batman, so some time to be able to play with the character a little bit is incredible honor.
So I believe it's a four-book series, right?
Four, yeah, we're
So
on this. I'm starting the script to the last one right now.
gotcha. Isn't book number two? That's out in a few weeks, I believe, right?
It is the end of the month.
End of the month. That's definitely going to be one on my pull list.
Glow in the dark cover.
I love the glow in the darks. They do actually really do glow in the dark. I know some books usually don't, but they actually do. They look awesome. For like the kind of like obviously you can't give away any of like the story or creative aspect, but for Batman, did you kind of I feel like this Batman especially, I'm not saying it's based off of the movie, but it's a little bit more of like a dark, mysterious Batman. Obviously, through the years, we kind of have different types of Batman. Was there any like thought process at all for that? Did you read old books and you're like, this is the Batman I do or don't want, or
No, I was
no?
just had the story in my head because originally it was going to be a vampire story, but they're doing a DC versus vampires right now. So
Hmm.
my story would have interfered with that, and they said, "Well, what else you got?" And I was like, "What about werewolves?" And then I
Yeah.
came to the werewolf story.
For something like I know you're probably aware of, this is like DC's like kind of like rebirth in a way. Like this is like their time to shine. We got Absolute Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, all these like huge books coming out. They're trying to change like the whole DC universe. Was it kind of planned that your book would release at this time? Like, did you plan it with them? Like, hey, like we have so much stuff coming out, let's send it out then, or does that have any correlation at all, or is just kind of when you're done with it?
No, we were supposed to release the same day that Absolute Batman came back, but there was an issue, I think, with shipping because of a hurricane.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was always in plans.
Gotcha. And then kind of last question. If you had one, if you had a piece of advice just for like a comic book writer, maybe like a horror guy, what would you give them? Just in terms of how do you get to where you are now, going from PA to producing to comic book writer and doing produce, like, you know what I mean? Like, how do you get to where you are now?
I would always say, if you're talking about writing, to figure out what your voice is and develop that. Because it's the same thing when you asked me the question about how I chose vampires and the way that I chose Killadelphia. I have my own way of looking at the world. And I think everyone has that. And if you can apply that to your work, you may work in a realm where you deal with one of these classic monsters or something that, territory that's been sort of mined, but you'll mine it in your way and
Hmm.
it'll feel fresh. It'll feel unique. And if you can create a unique little space for you within this incredibly competitive environment, you can survive because you have your way of doing it. If you look at a John Carpenter movie, it's a John Carpenter movie. You can tell. And if you watch a Jordan Peele movie, you can
Hmm.
tell because those people have voices and it's their original voice. And you can try to duplicate it, but you'll never do them as well as they do them. So, my advice would be as a writer, as a storyteller, develop your own voice, your own way. And it's something that also confidence wise you can always come back to and no one can take away from you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
You're
And
welcome.
guys, like we were talking about just a little bit ago, Batman Full Moon issue number 2 will be out later this month. I mean, you could always catch Rodney. He does a ton of Comic Cons. I know I got mine signed at New York Comic Con. I also got Subic. I was lucky enough to get both of you guys same day. Well,
Yeah.
actually, I think that was day after release, wasn't it? Or 2 days? It was
It's
pretty
something
close.
was within the same week, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty close. And it was kind of one of those books that like I like saw it and I was like, do I need another monsters in my life? Yes. The answer is yes. You do need another monsters in your life. So definitely pick that up. I appreciate you again for joining the podcast. I hope we get to see each other again soon. Guys, link below. We'll have all of Rodney's socials, Instagram, all that stuff, maybe a con schedule, whatever we can get to put together. That will all be down there to help promote. Don't forget, get his book, few weeks. I'm Nick. This is Rodney Barnes. Like, subscribe, and comment, and have a drink on the galaxy. Till next time, guys.